King Arthur has to be one of the lousiest historical movies I've ever seen. It had so much going for it too. The legend, the budget, the cast. This cast, dude, look at this lineup. But no, it stinks. It's so bad it bombed, failing to make any impact. You can squander potential, but can you squander 120 million of potential? You make something so terribly bland that trashing it is all it's good for. I love historical movies, and something that has anything to do with ancient Rome should have been like, you know, I'm in. You got me. You sold me on Rome. It's like telling me, hey man, there's this Netflix martial arts show. I'm like, okay. They like, it's got Catherine Winnick in it. I'm like, oh, fuck everybody, I'm in. But King Arthur? The medieval King Arthur not being medieval? That never felt right to me. Even if it's supposed to be the true story that inspired the fake story that became a myth that turned into a legend. I'm not going to get into the whole Arthur debate here since that's one big issue in a film with too many other things to talk about. If you want to get a lesson on Arthurian legend, I recommend these videos instead. They're easy to follow, concise, and will answer most of what you want to know or care to learn. It's all beyond the scope of this video. By comparison, I'll just give basic coverage that I've pieced together, if only to put my beatdown of this movie into context. You're gonna need it. So much went wrong that I gotta go through this bit by bit to show you why it can't be defended. Nobody should be defending this anyway. I'll defend stuff that I know people think suck. I can at least make arguments and points to certain easy targets that are cheap garbage. If my life was at stake and I had to say why Princess Diaries 2 is worth watching, I could do it. I could probably convince you as to why this Disney straight-to-video quality crap is actually decent.
Sorry!
If I keep doing these videos, then someday I might pick something I'm showing on screen right now and say why it's okay. I can't do that with King Arthur. It'll never be on the same level as any of these. It's flawed from its very conception. I intend to get a lot out on this one. Years of pent-up anger and dealing with other stresses in life right now, I'm not in a good mood. Okay, so there are a couple different versions to this movie, the theatrical and director's cut. I'll be critiquing the director one, which is the proper one. So, in case you thought the director's cut might save this movie, it doesn't. I also won't be talking about the 2017 King Arthur because I don't care. Never saw it. I only know about it because it became a legendary bomb, and I love bombs. Alright, hit the lights.
How did the story come to you? I mean, what sparked you? Did you research it? Did you just come across something on King Arthur?
Well, I'd actually seen something about the fact that the legends of Arthur might have come from the Sarmatians who were sent over to Britain to fight with Rome. And while I was doing Gladiator, I kept this thing in the back of my mind, you know, Arthur, the Romans. And so when I went off to Italy, I began to research and to write it. And Strangers in a Strange Land, sort of the Wild Bunch, very different from everything we've ever done about Arthur. And for me, the first believable Arthur that I'd ever come across.
This is how we start this mess, with the guy that wrote Gladiator, one of the GOAT historical movies and a personal favorite of mine. The fact that he went from that to this is an astounding drop-off. To say his heart was in the right place is, I think, as genuine a statement as I can make, considering what writers in Hollywood are like. And he wasn't alone in his efforts to go this route, since he had one of the biggest bankrollers in Hollywood action schlock at the time, Jerry Bruckheimer, as his patron. This guy's name is attached to so many projects I can't even get to them all. As if you don't already know this. By 2003, Bruckheimer's involvement was all Disney, yes, Disney, needed to push through a new King Arthur movie. This adaptation was going to be more grounded, quote-unquote historical and realistic. Something which I've read numerous times when researching this and vaguely remember when it was released. They make sure to slap it at the beginning just in case you forgot. Now, who did they tap to lead this project? Antoine Fuqua, who may or may not be the first guy you think who'd be able to get this job done.
All right, great, very great.
The most important thing Antoine brings is a realism and grittiness to the piece. He's so perfect for this. He's brought so much unbelievable stuff to this.
You know, I've been following Antoine's career since he did video for me for Dangerous Minds. He did the Coolio video, and that's how I really first started working with him and saw how talented he was.
Son of a bitch, Coolio? Really? The choice of Fuqua doing this doesn't seem like a sound one, but think of it in the context of back then. He was a known collaborator with Bruckheimer, he had just done Training Day, which meant he had a grace period of a couple years when he could do whatever he wanted. Then he did Tears of the Sun, which, well, ugh. I'll bring up again later. Then he gets bopped for this non-fantasy take on King Arthur. So he's coming into a project that surpasses both the scale and depth he's used to, but takes it on anyways because he believed he had enough confidence to do it right.
Antoine, when you first saw the script, I'm sure you began thinking about what it would be like to make this movie. What were the first things that went through your mind about how difficult this would be to shoot?
I had no idea how difficult it would be. I had no idea. Jerry tried to warn me, but I had no idea. I mean, I think the first thing that went through my mind is how complex it was. The new information that you get when you read about Pelagius and free will and Arthur being Roman and Britain. I mean, I grew up studying Joseph Campbell mythology and things like that, and I've never heard anything like this before.
Never heard it before because it's at best a guesstimation. We don't really know that much from this period since so few credible sources, let alone the few sources period, exist for us to identify if there even was a King Arthur, or if it's just, you know, a heavily romanticized folklore that was passed down for centuries and may have some very loose credibility based on a few different people and events in history. Looking back on the opening text, it starts off wrong, which, right there, I mean, come on. Where are they pulling this from? I doubt historians would agree on something so based in myth that they'd pinpoint it to one real hero in an era of extremely dubious and mostly lost record-keeping. From a historical standpoint, it makes sense that late antiquity Arthur wouldn't be medieval in the common sense, but yes, a Roman, Western Roman, or sub-Roman Britain. Franzoni and Fuqua added to this, bearing in mind the idea of a Britannia free from Roman occupation. I'll get to why that doesn't exactly work later, let me try to keep this on track. Fuqua had in mind the Vietnam War mixed in with the concept of immigrants fighting for a foreign power. The Vietnam War aspect lent itself to the plot by way of how the native Vietnamese were fighting for their own independence. The immigrant angle Fuqua took from how minorities came or were forced from other places to come to America and become assimilated, as well as how they fought for a country that wasn't their own. He envisioned this realistic take on the King Arthur story to be an R-rated venture, which Disney gave approval as long as it was through one of their puppet labels. In this case, Bruckheimer's own company and then active Touchstone Pictures. Disney didn't want a mature, violent movie staining their family-friendly image. Their mindset, not mine. Truth be told, the situation looked like this. Disney had two summer movies they wanted to release. King Arthur was one of them, the one that had a lot riding on it to do well. By the end, the pressure was so much they ended up changing their position on the rating, to the ire of Fuqua and Bruckheimer, who fought to release it as they intended. As much power as Bruckheimer had, it wasn't Disney level power, who forced them to do as they said. I doubt it would have made much of a difference. In fact, I know less people would have seen it since that's just how R works for audiences and movies like this. This was not going to be another Gladiator. And by the way, the other movie that Disney released that summer that they legit expected to underperform? Fucking National Treasure.
Well, your accent. Pennsylvania Dutch?
Saxony German.
Saxons.
Way to go on that prediction, guys. When King Arthur released on July 9th, 2004, it tanked at the domestic box office, opening number 3 to a dismal $15 million off a, remember, $120 million budget. Audiences just didn't care beyond superficial interest, which is probably a word that best describes what this movie feels like. It says King Arthur. It looks like epic historical action. It's led by people who should know what they're doing, but it's purely surface level entertainment. And me even calling it that is a stretch. It's a mess, and I really need to go through it to show you why it's so goddamn lousy. Now before I do that, credit where credit's due. Fuqua really took the reins on a project this size and tried to keep the logistics afloat. It was a major undertaking, and while not the same, I've had experience in army logistics and it can be a nightmare. I wouldn't want to be the guy responsible for pulling the weight of a job like this from start to finish. He filmed from June to November 2003, which ended up going far over budget and requiring additional shoots to cap off problems that arose during the principals. The film had competent actors, competent department leads, Hans Zimmer with the score and probably one of the highlights of the film, Slavomir Idzok giving Fuqua the know-how on upping the film's technical aspects to match the scope of the project, Conrad Buff in editing to make anything out of the scraps he was given, Dan Will's production design to include a fully sized fort and wall that took months to build, Harry Humphreys as advisor taking civilians who had zero experience and turning them into a fighting force in a limited time frame, and several visual effects supervisors, designers, assistants, and many others too numerous to include. The vast majority whom you never see or hear about yet are the backbone to this and many films. I don't want to downplay the fact that despite my dislike of this movie, many people put a lot of effort into this. It was a very difficult task for which they should be praised in undertaking and completing. It almost makes me feel sorry that I'm not going to trash the hell out of it. But no, it has to be done. You make a movie this bad, you gotta be called on it. Here we go, King Arthur. Just ignore this part. Pretend it's not there, okay?
By 300 AD, the Roman Empire extended from Arabia to Britain. But they wanted more. More land. More peoples loyal and subservient to Rome.
By 300 AD, the Roman Empire had suffered the 50-year crisis that tore the empire apart. More land to conquer was not a priority. As far as they were concerned, they had their hands full trying to keep what they had together. When Emperor Constantine took power, he did campaign against the Sarmatians and won. But this movie not only drastically simplifies this, it creates a very misleading set of events leading up to it and in its aftermath. Also, this narration is being done by Lancelot, who to my knowledge was written in much later than the early works of Arthur. But wait, Lancelot's not finished.
But no people so important as the powerful Sarmatians to the east. The Romans, impressed by their bravery and horsemanship, spared their lives.
Rome for hundreds of years used auxiliary forces in foederati to bolster their legions. Sarmatians existed too, but were hardly the only ones. Greuthungi, Thervingi, Ostrogoths, Alans, and other tribes existed around that same location and flip-flopped allegiance to Rome. The fact that Lancelot pins this on a single battle makes me believe Franzoni did what I call make shit up. The basic gist of this intro is Lancelot retelling how he and other Sarmatians have to serve Rome because of this defeat. Why just one defeat? I don't know. Foederati such as these were common in the latter stages of the Roman Empire's existence, and they'd end up seeing allies turn to enemies and vice versa over the course of time. With an empire this vast and fragile, they needed whatever respite and buffer zones they could get. So Lancelot and the other boys get shipped off to Britannia, which makes little sense since 1. That's a long ass journey, man. 2. Better strategic alternatives exist. 3. The culture and language are totally different. 4. Cavalry in heavily forested, hilly, and mountainous terrain are severely hindered. And 5. It serves no purpose aside from this one story and to back up the historian's questionable claims that Arthur's knights were really Sarmatian horsemen. Did different cultures get mixed and sent to various places as part of Rome's legions? Yes, but this is a very far-fetched way to incorporate history into story.
So, as our forefathers had done, we made our way and reported to our Roman commander in Britain, ancestrally named for the first Artorius, or Arthur.
We finally get to see young Artorius Castus, aka Arthur, hanging with Pelagius the monk. Why they couldn't have started with this, I don't know. I learned that this movie has ways to make you not care about its lead.
Come. Behold, Arthur. Young knights. If you so choose, they may someday be yours to lead, just as your father before you.
I'm to be their commander?
Yes. Should they perish in battle, to live your life gloriously, in honor of their memory.
And what of their free will?
It has always fallen to a few to sacrifice for the good of many. The world isn't a perfect place. But perhaps people like you, Arthur, and me, and them, can make it so.
Why? Why is it that Arthur gets to lead them? Simply for being Roman? First of all, he has no training whatsoever and looks younger than them. And he hasn't even been given a reason to fight yet, as you'll see later. He gets a spiel from Pelagius, who speaks of free will. There was a real guy named Pelagius, but he died long before this movie takes place. He mentors Arthur about free will, but not in the way they would have thought about it back then. The movie's 21st century message, much like Braveheart, revolves around freedom, just not in the context of their time. Therefore, it's very misleading. One transition later and we see our knights, or what's left of them. 15 years of active duty combat whittled them down to this. They're here on their last mission to protect a Roman escort. Just in the nick of time, cause a picked raid is about to go down. Now I've got a problem. The problem here isn't the Picts, it's the Romans. They look like they came from the beginning era of the Empire, not the end. Most audiences would know of them looking like this, but by this point they would have looked more like this. Very different and reflecting the many changes it underwent during its existence. No time for that though, the action started. Despite being heavily outnumbered, ambushed, and having no cohesion as a unit, Arthur and his goon squad arrived in time to save the day. Those who saw the theatrical version were at the mercy of the PG-13 rating toning down the violence. Director's cut, you get to see all the original blood and gore. So they win, and Arthur, true to his character, says the dumbest thing yet.
Why did Merlin send you south of the wall?
You know this! Picts have raided for centuries. Why would now be any different? If you've been fighting here this long, this would be common knowledge. You even said so right here.
Control the north of Hadrian's Wall.
They do, but they occasionally venture south. Rome's anticipated withdrawal from Britain has only increased their daring.
Considering how you were here to protect a high-value target, a target that they literally just attacked, figure it out.
Roads. British rebels who hate Rome.
Men who want their country back.
Who leads them?
He's called Merlin. A dark magician, some say.
Nah, not this time. This is Merlin. More like a druid with a campaign of resistance against foreign powers. He's all about that freedom. So we come to find out that a bishop, this guy, is here on some important business. His name's Germanus, and historically there was a Bishop Germanus that came to Britannia, but he died a couple decades before this film's plot and wasn't at all involved in anything this movie presents. The real guy, much like here, was no fan of Pelagius, whom Arthur adores. After the fight, they head over to a manned section of Hadrian's Wall. The goon squad chops it up, and while recognizable actors help, they're simplistic characters with thin backstories.
What about you, Lancelot? What are your plans for her?
Well, if this woman of Gawain's is as beautiful as she claims, I expect to be spending a lot of time at Gawain's house. His wife will welcome the company.
I see. And what will I be doing?
Wondering as your good fortune that all your children look like me.
So before or after I hit you with my axe?
Thing is though, you need these guys being playful and jokey because Arthur himself is a fucking bore. The one character the movie champions is the least interesting and likable.
Had enough. You should visit me. It's a magnificent place, Rome. Ordered, civilized, advanced.
The breeding ground of arrogant fools.
The greatest minds in all the lands have come together in one sacred place to help make mankind free.
No, they didn't. This movie likes to think of Rome as if it were at the height of its power, yet at the same time disintegrating. Rome had been sacked hardcore by the Visigoths in 410 and again by the Vandals in 455. It was a shadow of its former self, much like the rest of its empire getting gangbanged by barbarians. By 476, 9 years after the events of this movie, the Western Roman Empire ceased to exist. It had been corrupted, plagued by war and unrest, and swallowed out of existence. Only the eastern half survived. I'll just assume these guys have no idea about those events, but come on. Might want to tell these Sarmatians that the Huns completely trampled over Sarmatia too. Back to this. Arthur gives a speech, as he often does in this movie. You can see these guys are the only surviving knights after 15 years. Ugh, calling them knights makes no sense either. Germanus and his lackey are portrayed to be intolerant and not so good. Then Lancelot's buddy from Hornblower shows up to escort them to the meeting.
A round table. What sort of evil is this?
Now that's gotta be the dumbest line I've ever heard in a movie. And of course they had round tables back then. The one in this movie is just artistically exaggerated. Come to think of it, this round table stuff was written into the legend during the medieval times. Nice research, guys! Meanwhile, the bishop talks of the empire as if it were still a big, unified realm when it wasn't, then brings up the Pope.
The Pope's taken a personal interest in you. Alas, we are all but players in an ever-changing world. Barbarians from every corner are almost at Rome's door. Because of this, Rome and the Holy Father have decided to remove ourselves from indefensible outposts, such as Britain.
The bishop goes on about the Pope as if it weren't the Emperor's decision to make. The Pope's position at this point was nowhere near as powerful as it would be in the late medieval ages. The bishop then mentions the Saxons, who should have already settled in southern Britannia for decades by this point, but in this just invaded from the north.
Saxons will claim it soon.
Saxons?
Yes. In the north, a massive Saxon incursion has begun.
The Saxons only claim what they kill.
And only kill everything.
Gentlemen, your discharge papers with safe conduct throughout the Roman Empire. I must have a word with your commander. In private. Rome has issued a final order for you and your men.
Final order?
You are to travel north to rescue the family of Marius Honorius and return, in particular, with Marius' son, Alecto. Alecto is the Pope's favorite godchild and pupil. It is his destiny to become a bishop, perhaps even Pope, one day.
On this day, you ask this of my men. On this day. They have risked their lives for 15 years.
You know what, dude? Instead of giving another speech, you should be asking a very simple question. Something Franzoni, Fuqua, Bruckheimer, or anyone should have asked. What the fuck is the Pope's godchild doing beyond Hadrian's Wall? Why would anyone, let alone someone that important, be living somewhere that'd basically be a death sentence? And how didn't you already know this super VIP family lived here? You want to try thinking of that, or are you just going to keep standing there? Roman outposts existed in what would now be present-day Scotland, but even those were considerably scaled back by this point. The most northern of outposts were gone since as late as the early 3rd century. Everything under Roman control was south of the wall and had been for hundreds of years. And no, the movie doesn't explain this, nor does anyone even bring it up. Arthur clearly has no way to say no, short of killing him and taking those DD-214s. Not like he couldn't have done that. Romans killed emperors for less. Cut to the next scene when celebrations are going on and the Goon Squad think they're free before Arthur breaks the bad news.
But I must ask you now for one further trial.
Drink.
We must leave on a final mission for Rome, before our freedom can be granted.
Some of them go along with it just cause that's their character. Others are pissed off, but plot says they have to go, so they have to go. If there's a loyalty toward Arthur, since this is King Arthur, it does a poor job at displaying that. I don't get what these guys see in Arthur that they couldn't see in, like, Lancelot. He's a stiff that isn't like them culturally, religiously, or in personality. All he shares is their sentiment of freedom. Whatever kinship this movie could have developed is never truly there to begin with. I need to also note again how underwritten these knights are. Dancy and Edgerton don't have distinguishing traits at all. Mads Mikkelsen has a hawk.
Where you been, huh? Where you been?
Griffith likes women except Guinevere.
Hands have come together in one sacred place to help make mankind free.
And the women?
And Ray Winstone pumps out kids and yells a lot. And I mean shit, like a lot. He yells so much that I made a compilation for it.
I'm a free man! I will choose my own fate! Of course I'm coming! Can't let you go on your own! You'll all get killed! I'm just saying what you're all thinking! Antoine! They rules!
Shut up! On the opposite end, Ray Stevenson is a robot. He's so underutilized considering how much character he was given to a show like Rome, where he excelled and had so many layers to him. Plus, unlike here, he showed he had a great comedic side to him.
It's as hot as Vulcan's dick. Here I come, girls. I'm gonna drink all the wine, smoke all the smoke, and fuck every whore in the city.
Show some dignity. You are under the standard.
I'll talk to him.
He's not under the standard.
Good shit. So a couple scenes later, we see the Saxons for the first time. I can sum it up like this: Saxon bad. That's it. There's nothing about them aside from pillaging and razing. This makes them seem more like Vikings, instead of the culturally nuanced Germanic tribes they really were, who by the way were once allied with the Romanized Britons before turning on them as time went on. Also, we see them here invading from the north, which they never did. They came from the south, then worked their way up before choosing to settle primarily in the south. Their leader here, Cerdic, is the big baddie.
Don't touch their women.
Anytime I hear this guy talk, it reminds me of Mickey Rourke from fucking Immortals.
His pain has just begun. I'll take the main army to the wall. Bring the family there. What would I want with a traitor in my midst? Why should I trust you? You're a traitor to your own people. Young women. I have plenty of women. Slaves and weaponry. I have plenty of weapons. If you want to challenge me, you have to have a sword in your hand. As long as my heart beats, I rule. You hold your tongue.
Oh my god. One day I'm gonna talk about that one. Back to the heroes, who prepped up and head out beyond the wall on their mission. The gate itself is so dusty and rusty trying to open that it proves again it's been a long time since they used it. How long has this one family been living out there? Does it even matter anymore? At least we have a real plot now. A group of elite soldiers venture behind enemy lines to rescue an important person but end up having to protect the natives from an evil army, while at the end a guy named Arthur helps bring freedom and becomes leader. Oh, wait a minute. I just gave the plot to Tears of the Sun. Same shit, different take. They went through all that trouble to make 2 movies back to back with the same themes and plot points. Why am I not surprised? Anyway, they haul ass because the Saxons are coming, but the Picts are tracking them.
Woads. They're tracking us.
Oh yeah, they call them woads in this movie. 'Cause the woad plant they use to dye themselves. What a pointless change. Cut to the Saxons on their march and, you know, the Saxons could have just sailed around the wall like everyone else did for centuries. But no, they're badasses. They're helped by this traitor guy who, well, we never get an answer as to why he's a traitor. And he'll never tell you why either. Arthur and the goon squad are then ambushed by the Picts. I wonder why the Picts never did ambushes against the Saxons before they got to the wall. Caught in a trap, Arthur and his team were ready to throw down, but Merlin calls it off. Cryptic cunning or bad writing? You'll find that out later. The squad makes it to the estate to meet Marius, played by the guy who was Balin from The Hobbit of all people. Is this a previously abandoned fort from before? When did this family establish themselves here? I'm looking at my notes and it's just endless negatives that keep piling up. Marius says the Pope gave him this land, which I don't think the Pope even had that power back then.
In the land given to us by the Pope of Rome.
Well, you're about to give it to the Saxons.
Even if he did, someone had to think about this. Giving land that the Romans didn't own, and moving emperor-linked family there surrounded by Picts who quite literally kill Romans. No one ever questions this in the movie. Emperor Honorius, who Marius' family is connected to, withdrew the legions from Britannia in 410 AD. They knew at the time they couldn't hold it any longer and left the natives, who were quite Romanized and Christianized by that point, to fend for themselves. See, aren't true stories great? Franzoni again doing what I like to call making shit up. Arthur knows he has little time. He finds Alecto, the Pope's godson. However, he also senses a lack of freedom. This is where he stops being a person and becomes a vessel for the movie's message. I've failed to state up to this point that Arthur is a Christian, unlike his fellow knights. He sees so much wrong in this world that he feels he needs to make it right. That sounds like what a hero should do. This causes some tension between him and his peers, as well as a crisis of faith and duty as the plot goes on. Thing is, it goes overboard in how he dishes out justice. He's literally freedom man, and regarding how a person would think and act in this era, that is, late antiquity, he feels removed from his time period with his overdone do-goodery. I blame Pelagius. Or wait, Pelagius never talked about this stuff? Oh, so the movie dumbed down Pelagius' message? I don't know, Arthur seems to have taken the freedom thing literally.
And you, all of you, were free from your first breath!
Not that this isn't a bad message, it's just superficial. Like I'm watching a Disney-fied R-rated movie. Oh wait, but I can't go on about this. There's no time left. Saxons are coming. They all prep to head back, with news of the approaching enemy.
Flanked us to the east. They're coming from the south, trying to cut off our escape. They'll be here before nightfall.
How many?
An entire army.
And the only way out is to the south?
East. There is a trail heading east, across the mountains. It means we have to cross behind the Saxon lines. That's the one we should take.
Don't ask about geography because I gave up. Meanwhile, something fishy is nearby, and Arthur's freedom senses tingle. They force their way in, and all of a sudden we're in a dungeon from Warhammer. Where's all that green light coming from? Seriously, where the fuck is that green light coming from? Oh wait, they find Keira, who still looks quite good for someone who's been down here for who knows how long. Cold, starving, tortured, yet she only looks pale and hungover. With writing like this, trust me, one night's rest and she'll be fine. This foul treatment brings Arthur to a boil. Did Christians persecute pagans? Sure. Did pagans persecute Christians? You bet. It was an awful time. For Arthur to think this is new knowledge to him, after a 15-year stint killing pagans, you would think he'd take the situation a bit better. No time to dawdle though, these guys are on the move, and they're stuck between a wall and a hard place.
If the Saxons find us, we will have to fight.
Then save your anger for them.
Is this Rome's quest? Or Arthur's?
He's very human. There's no magic. The power is in the man more than the sword. You don't just become a king by wielding a sword. You have to earn it. This is what the movie's about. Him earning the right to be king.
Fuqua's right. Holding a sword doesn't make you a king in the real world. But inept direction saps the life out of your movie. And we're over an hour into this one. By making the legend of Arthur grounded and realistic, all the mythical elements and fantastical stuff is stripped. What we're left with is, unless you have some powerhouse writer and director to save it, an uncompelling story with boring characters. So back to Arthur, who checks on a couple people. This one kid I forgot to mention because he's 6 subplots down, and Guinevere, 3 finger pops away from seducing Arthur. She just got tortured, and only a couple hours later she's already talking smack.
Famous Briton who kills his own people.
With an accent so posh, it's hard to buy her as someone who's from the quote-unquote uncivilized north. She couldn't fake a Geordie or Scottish accent? Actually, you know what? That might have been more laughable coming from her, just keep it the way it is.
I belong to this land. Where do you belong, Arthur? Is there nothing about my land that appeals to your heart? Your own father married a Briton. Even he must have found something to his liking.
Arthur isn't gonna buy her nationalism speech without some intimate convincing. On their way, they see what looks to be Roman soldiers who sallied out beyond the wall, only to get slaughtered by the Saxons. Can you tell me why they bother doing that? Why would you give up a strong defensible position? Unless these guys are just scouts or something. It's still pretty dumb, just wait for them. It gets dark, so they camp nearby. Gwyn, failing to get Arthur to chat, tries talking to someone who isn't a plank of wood.
'Tis a beautiful country, is it not?
If you say so.
And where do you come from that compares? The Black Sea.
How the hell does she even know what the Black Sea is from living this far away, let alone where it was? I'm assuming someone who's never left her corner of an island on the opposite side of the continent. And remember, Keira was 18 when she did this, playing a much younger Guinevere, had much knowledge of anything beyond Hadrian's Wall. Kind of like Ygritte from Game of Thrones not even knowing what a windmill was.
Is that a palace?
It's a windmill.
Now she was a keeper.
This is heaven for me.
I don't believe in heaven. I've been living in this hell. But if you represent what heaven is, then take me there.
Cheeky bastard. But if you think it gets more sexy than that, you're mistaken. From here on, it's nothing more than cursory glances and some insert scenes. She talks to him again later when he's more willing to open up. Still doesn't go anywhere, especially after he hits a home run with the way he ends the conversation.
I would have left you and the boy there to die.
That was such a conversation ender that they literally only have 2 more lines said to each other for the rest of the movie. Fuqua stated that he altered the script by taking out any love triangle since he found no evidence of this in his own research of Lancelot and Arthur. Of course not, since Guinevere and Lancelot weren't part of the original text. It wouldn't have mattered in this particular plot, aside from watching a twig and a rock fight over some Brittonic real estate. This film is so far removed from the established lore anyway that it may as well not even be called King Arthur. Later, Guinevere wanders over here. Arthur's looking for some action, but then out pops Merlin. How did she contact him? How did he know to meet right here? Arthur must have met Merlin before since he knows him by face. If you think those questions need answering, it only gets worse. Arthur goes into a backstory that probably should have been at the beginning because here it feels shoehorned in. Apparently Merlin is responsible for his mom's death, which wasn't brought up until now. But see, this goes deep, so let me try and explain this. Merlin wants the Romans out of Britannia. Arthur is half Briton, half Roman. Merlin attacks Arthur's village for some reason, where the debuffed sword Excalibur rests on Arthur's dad's grave. So Merlin, without planning it, gives Arthur a reason to pull the sword out to save his mom after she already died from the Pict attack, which now gives Arthur hatred of the Picts so that he becomes commander. A commander who then kills Picts for 15 years, but ends up finding an ultra-nationalist Guinevere in a Warhammer dungeon with green light that he could have easily have avoided on his final mission for Rome if it weren't for the freedom senses. Come to find out, she has direct connections to Merlin and is able to lure both of them to this very meeting after Merlin spared his life a day earlier, and now Arthur is just one sex scene away from fighting for a new cause and becoming king. Do you see what I mean? Do you see how this all unfolded? Do you see how this is completely stupid? Is it apparent now how lousy this is? I wish it stopped there, because I'm exhausted at this point. I don't even want to look at it anymore. But there's a whole nother half a movie to cover, and I'm out of time right now. It already feels like this is going to take up the rest of my year. Of all the movies I could have finished on, it had to be this. Ugh. There will be a follow-up to this covering the rest of the movie. I really doubt I'll be any nicer. If I try doing this all at once, I think I'll lose my mind. So, till next time.